So without further ado, let me pass over to Madeline for the latest look at both how US but also international travelers are thinking about both domestic and international travel. Over to you, Madeline.
Great, thanks, Chris. I want to speak about some recent research that we did relating to people who had leisure travel that was planned between when this research was fielded at the end of March in 2020 through the end of June in 2020. My name is Madeline List. I'm a research analyst here at Phocuswright. And the way this research worked is we spoke with 400 people in each of the markets that I'm going to be speaking about today, which are the US, UK, France, and Germany, all who had leisure trips coming up. This is part of a broader set of resources that we're putting out here at Phocuswright and Phocuswire. These include the hotel forecasts and a special series that we're releasing on that on a city-by-city basis. We have an expanded Fast Facts webinar about this research that's available on YouTube and our website, some sector related updates as well, and Phocuswire has a live blog with updates on current events related to the travel industry, as well as an In Focus podcast.
And also some great resources there, Madeline, on Phocuswire from the likes of Doug Lansky, who I know is doing your Destination X series on how different destinations are tackling with the crisis.
Yes, I have been relying on a lot of Phocuswire updates as this goes on. So my colleagues there are doing great work, and I really recommend the content that they've been putting out. So going through the impact of COVID-19 on these travelers' plans, just a little bit of context here. I'm going to go a little quicker through some of the actions that they're planning on taking with their soonest upcoming trips. We know that this is a situation where plans can change sometimes on a day-to-day basis. What's more constant here are the attitudes that they have and what is creating boundaries to traveling right now, what their barriers are, and what's going to help bring down those barriers in the future, what signs of recovery they're going to look for. And so some context about these people and the attitude going into this research and changing their trip plans if that was something that they needed to do. We know that since the window that we're looking at is a pretty soon upcoming set of trips between the end of March and the end of June, we have a lot of people who would have already taken the time off work or had time off work approved, people who would have put down money, people who would have made bookings. There can be a degree of frustration that comes when somebody is forced to be grounded, forced to make changes to their plans. So we wanted to ask travelers what their perspective was on their own government's travel restrictions. And what we found was overall, people were really accepting of the fact that certain restrictions needed to be made. Between 44 to 50% of travelers who we spoke to felt that the restrictions were just right given the situation. And then additional third in each market, about a third, felt that the restrictions could be even stricter, and that was something that they would be comfortable with given the severity of the COVID-19 situation. So while there were a lot of extraordinary measures that had to be taken with people making a lot of changes and often making them rapidly, the fact of the matter is that these changes that they're making, they're coming from a place of understanding and appreciation for the necessity and not a place of resentment for having to make any changes to their plans. When it comes to what they're actually doing, the most common action in the US, UK, and France was to postpone the soonest upcoming trip. After that was to cancel. In Germany, the situation was reversed, where canceling was a bit more common than postponing. And really the bright spot here, as I see it, is that people aren't willing to throw in the towel yet and pull the plug on that trip that they have coming up. They made plans and they're excited about the destination. They have this sustained level of enthusiasm for it, and they don't want to cancel the whole thing right away. As the situation progresses, since we don't know how long people may have before they can travel again, it may take additional engagements with them and additional marketing and messaging in order for them to really keep that level of excitement up. But what we're seeing from them so far is that they don't want to take big measures to cancel their trips if they were already excited about the destination and where they were going next. If they are postponing, most people are pretty optimistic about when they think they're going to be able to travel again. The majority of travelers felt that a 1 to 6 month push off from the original departure date would be appropriate. In France, they're especially optimistic, where about 3 out of 4 people who had to postpone a trip felt like they could do it within that 1 to 6 month window. And if they did cancel, we wanted to dig deeper into that and find out what they're doing with that time that was designated for travel. And really what we uncovered here is that people who were canceling completely were people who were affected pretty profoundly by the COVID-19 situation and the restrictions that came with that. We found that only 16% or fewer, depending on the market, were able to go back to their original regular routines. And the vast majority had to return to routines that were affected by COVID. So all in all, these were people whose lives outside of travel were affected quite strongly if they did have to cancel. And when it came to the prospect of potentially doing a staycation, there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for this building right now. In the US, the people who canceled were somewhat more engaged with this idea, where 22% of people who canceled wanted to do a staycation, but the numbers went down from there. There are really 2 sides to this part of the data. One of those sides is that certain restrictions would have already been in place by the time that they would have the option of doing a staycation. Certain local attractions or dining options would have been closed that acted as a natural prohibitor for them going forward with a staycation. But the other side of this, which is a theme that we're going to see at various places throughout this research, is that these people who have leisure trips coming up are really focused on maximizing their time. And if they have time that's off work and time that was originally intended to travel, they want to use it for travel. They want to be using it to be able to enjoy their time as much as they hope to. And that's a level of zeal and excitement that hopefully we can capitalize on as people start to increase their openness to traveling again once circumstances allow. In terms of the actual reasons why they were considering actually making changes to their plans, this really fell into 3 main buckets. So the first big theme was the risk of catching or spreading COVID. This could be at the destination or in transit. And that risk of getting ill themselves was something that was a more primary concern than spreading COVID. People are really focusing on their own health first, and spreading is something that's a concern and it's important, but it took a backseat in comparison to the actual risk of becoming ill. Another major theme were restricted mobility, with people who are taking time to travel to somewhere new and are excited about the destination. They felt really inhibited by that prospect that they could go all the way somewhere new and find themselves cooped up in a quarantine, or another risk of potentially being stranded due to border closures or because of changing transit schedules and not being able to return home as scheduled. In Germany, which had very expansive testing, a very supportive healthcare system, people were actually a bit more scared of quarantine than they were afraid of getting sick. And then the last bucket here is the ability to fully enjoy a destination. Once people are going somewhere new, they really want to absorb a place for all that it has to offer. And so if the lodging options are restricted because of closures, if dining options are restricted, or to a lesser extent, if attractions and activities aren't available in the way that they would be in normal times and normal circumstances, this was a turnoff and something that people considered strongly when it came to making them make changes to their upcoming trips. Now, in terms of traveling internationally, travelers don't necessarily think the act of crossing borders or going abroad is something that's going to make them sick. I want to caveat that this isn't a commentary on a specific region or a specific country, because this is something that can vary by destination. But the idea of going abroad isn't something that makes travelers think they're more likely to catch COVID in a foreign place than they would be at home. When we look at how domestic and international travelers considered getting sick at a destination as a factor that made them change their trips, the statistics are really similar here. In France, they're a little more apprehensive that international travel could pose a greater risk of contracting COVID, but overall, people really feel like if there's a risk domestically, there's a risk internationally, and crossing the border isn't going to make a difference in terms of that increased risk of becoming ill. But the factor that is really playing a strong part here with making them apprehensive about traveling would be the air travel component, if that was present. Travelers associate air travel with a higher risk of getting infected. This is particularly amplified in the US, where 70% of people who have air travel with their soonest upcoming leisure trip said that they were concerned enough about becoming ill in transit that this was something that made them make changes to their plans. So it could also mean that while air is something that we need to continue to watch, this could be a sector that has some lagging recovery in terms of the way people perceive its safety or perceive their risk of becoming ill here. And we can have people in markets where they're able to access a destination through driving or through another non-air form of transit, opening up to that idea of going somewhere new before we have people who would need to travel to a specific destination by air feeling like they have an increased comfort level. And more on what's going to make people feel that they can feel confident and open and comfortable traveling again. I want to start off by talking about something that's frankly not going to do a very good job with increasing their openness, and that's COVID-related bargains. We asked people who have traveled coming up, what are the chances that within that window between the end of March and the end of June, they might take advantage of a COVID-related deal that's presented to them. And most people felt like this wasn't a hot prospect for them. We have some more young travelers than travelers who are 35 and above who would feel comfortable with taking advantage of a deal or a bargain. But overall, good prices aren't something that's going to move the needle for most people here. But what is going to make people have a different attitude about what would make them feel comfortable traveling again is a reduction of the barriers that we spoke about before that had originally made them change their plans. So there was a fear about health risk and about a risk of getting infected. They want to see a drop of infection rates. And this was the #1 thing that travelers were looking for in the US and France and Germany. And it also means that while they're going to be looking at actual statistics and risks in terms of fear of getting sick at a destination, if there are other things that would help boost their perceptions of safety within a destination that can be messaged to them, this is something that can be really important. If there are additional social distancing measures that are being taken in lodging options or at tourist sites or at attractions and activities, that's something that can matter. And then additional stricter sanitation measures can be something that's really important to them as well. Lowered restrictions is something that's important. In the UK, the #1 thing that these travelers were looking for to feel comfortable traveling again was an official government advisory that this is something that's okay. And in other markets, they often cited this as something that they were looking for as well. And then in addition, with the lowered restrictions, they want to see that quarantine policies are relaxing, and they're also looking for the border restrictions and any closures that are happening there to be opened up before there's more comfort with traveling again there. And then the last is that people really want to experience the full zeitgeist of a place. They want to take in whatever it has to offer. And so that means that first and foremost, they would be looking for lodging options and dining options to open up again. They want to know that those are things that are available to them if they're going to trek out somewhere new, that it's something they can take in, and then to a lesser extent, attractions and activities are something that they're going to be watching to really feel like they can experience the full flavor of a place with everything that they were looking forward to. So overall, one of the things that's so important to call out here is that some of this is going to be a waiting game. There's going to be some need to watch those public health statistics and the infection rates to see when those will start dropping. It's going to be important for making people feel comfortable traveling again. And those government policies are also a big external factor that is going to come into play here. But then there are other strategic tools that we can keep in account when it comes to our strategic arsenal in order to really contact people and target them at a time when they could feel comfortable traveling again and kind of wake them back up and stoke that desire to travel again. So one of the things to keep in account is, again, this isn't a commentary on a specific destination or specific country, but international and domestic travel markets have similar challenges when it comes to making people feel comfortable with any transmission risks. This could be especially important to take into account with European markets, where so many people are living in places where they have easy access to international markets that they can reach through car or rail or other similar modes of transportation. But here, air travel is perceived as particularly risky. It's something where there could be psychological barriers potentially. There are the factors like recycled airflow that could be on people's minds. There are some very practical restrictions with not necessarily being able to maintain the levels of social distancing people might want to have in transportation, or not feeling like they have the flexibility to move freely in the aircraft if something does make them feel uncomfortable. So this is something that might be a lagger in terms of how long it takes to recover, which means that drive markets, or markets where people can access a place with non-air forms of transportation, can be a low-hanging fruit in those early phases of recovery, as those comfort levels are finally starting to wake up and increase once again.
Yeah, and I think that point about air travel is particularly pertinent. There was some coverage today in the US about airlines and social distancing, etc. And so sectors of our tourism economy have particular challenges in terms of emphasizing safety, and as a whole, even when we're on a stronger recovery path, communicating clear information around health is going to be critical, because this is a health-driven emergency. And to that point, and we've seen a variety of other research from other partners as well, Madeline, highlight this final point here, that marketing communications around deals or offers or incentives to travel are really not going to be effective. In fact, might be a negative if it's not in close concert with that official advice on when and how it's appropriate to travel.
Right. Personal safety is so important, and while bargains can be something that would often matter to people, it's just not overriding that desire to feel like they're going to be safe and look after their own health.
Yes, that's right. Madeline, quick question, and before we come back to questions at the end, but Morika is asking, what specific changes do you think are going to happen to national or international travel? For example, private tours or small group tours, or people traveling in families or individuals. Are they going to become, for example, far more popular than group travel?
Group travel is something that has a sense of, depending on the specific type, there might be a feeling of loss of control of who else can be in those groups. It's very likely that people might want to travel in groups that they would be able to control. So whether that's one other partner or a family, as people very often do right now, that could be something that we see more often. It's a little hard to tell right now. We're really feeling this out piece by piece, but we do see that when people have those feelings that they might not be able to control their specific health or safety in a situation, they pull back and they act with a lot more caution.